She rode through his gate after 8 years and said 5 words that stopped him cold. "You promised you would marry me." Marcus Brennan was a rancher who hadn't left his land in almost a decade. Wren Red Feather was the Apache girl whose family was driven away by a forged warrant and a powerful man's greed, all to steal a silver mine hidden beneath 50 acres of dirt. Now she's back, carrying a deed that proves everything, and the men who want that land have already killed one witness to keep it buried. What Marcus doesn't know yet is that his own grandfather hid the truth for decades. And the woman standing in front of him spent 6 years teaching herself law just so she could come back and fight. But when she discovers that her pride may have cost an innocent man his life, the real battle isn't in the courtroom. It's between two people who have to decide if love can survive the weight of everything they've done wrong. The lesson: you don't chase what you want. You become someone worth coming back to, and you never, ever make someone else's choice for them, no matter how much you love them. The meaning. This story teaches us that real love isn't about grand rescues or perfect timing. It's about showing up, staying honest, and respecting someone enough to let them choose their own path, even when it terrifies you. If that line, "Some things don't need fences to keep them, they just need a reason to stay," hit you the way it hit me, drop a comment and tell me which moment gave you chills. Hit like if you believe promises still matter. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe so you're here when the next story drops. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. The woman rode through his gate like she owned the place, and in a way Marcus Brennan could not yet understand. She did. She sat a spotted Appaloosa with the ease of someone raised under open sky, dark hair braided with a strip of red cloth, dust coating her buckskin jacket like a second skin. He did not recognize her. 8 years is a long time, and the girl he remembered had been 17 with scraped knees and a temper that could curdle milk. This woman was something else entirely. She reined her horse 10 feet from where he stood, a fence post in one hand and a hammer in the other, and said the words that would unravel everything he thought he knew about his life. "Rancher, you promised you would marry me a long time ago. Did you think I would forget?" Marcus Brennan stood there with red dirt on his boots and sawdust in his hair, and his mouth half open like a trout pulled from the creek. The September sun beat down on Redstone Ranch the way it always did, relentless and indifferent, turning the Colorado high plains into a shimmering furnace of gold grass and red clay. Behind him, the fence he had been mending for the better part of the morning leaned at a crooked angle, same as it had leaned every autumn for as long as he could remember. He was 27 years old. He had been fixing that fence since he was 14. The woman on the Appaloosa waited. She had the kind of patience that comes not from gentleness, but from knowing exactly how long she was willing to give you before she made up her mind about you for good. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I said if you still wanted to," he managed. "That is 2 different things." Something flickered behind her eyes. Not hurt exactly, more like a match struck in a dark room, just enough light to see the shape of things before it went out. "I rode 400 miles to get here, Marcus Brennan. Does that answer your question?" He knew that voice. Somewhere beneath the new steadiness of it, beneath the years that had turned its edges smooth and sharp at the same time, he knew it. He had heard it once in the summer dark, furious and frightened and young, telling him she would come back. He just had not believed her. 8 years earlier. June 1898. The smell of sun-baked cedar posts, the sound of wind through tall grass, like a hand running slow over silk, the grit of red clay that worked into every crease of your skin and never fully washed out no matter how hard you scrubbed. Marcus Brennan was 19 years old the summer everything started, though he would not understand that for a long time. He stood on the porch of the ranch house his grandfather had built 30 years before and watched the sun climb the eastern ridge, painting the valley in shades of amber and rust. And he told himself that today would be a good day because the fence on the north pasture needed mending, and the waterhole by the creek needed clearing. And these were problems a man could solve with his hands, which was the only kind of problem Marcus trusted. The ranch was 400 acres of Colorado high plains, red dirt and golden grass and aspen groves that turned the ridges into fire every October. It was called Redstone Ranch because of the clay, the deep iron-red earth that colored everything it touched, boots and clothes and skin and memory. His grandfather, Reverend Thomas Caldwell, had built it from nothing in 1865, 33 years ago, back when the land was wild and the nearest neighbor was a day's ride, and a man's word was the only contract that mattered. Caldwell was still alive that summer, but failing. His mind was sharp as ever. He still quoted scripture at breakfast and corrected Marcus's grammar, and remembered the name of every horse he had ever owned. But his hands shook when he lifted his coffee, and he had not been on a horse in 2 years. And some mornings Marcus found him sitting on the porch at dawn, staring at the eastern ridge like he was waiting for something that would never come. Marcus glanced across the property line toward the thin column of smoke rising from the cabin to the north. The Red Feather place, an Apache family, the only one in the valley. He had seen the father on the road a few times, a lean, quiet man named Jacob, who nodded but never spoke more than necessary. There was a daughter, too, though Marcus had only seen her at a distance, a quick-moving figure with dark hair who seemed to appear and disappear along the ridgeline like a hawk's shadow. His grandfather had spoken with Jacob Redfeather many times. Marcus had heard their voices on the porch late at night, low and serious, but he had never asked what about. There were things about his grandfather that Marcus had learned not to question, the same way you learn not to poke at a bruise just because it is there. He went inside to get his tools. In the barn, while reaching for a coil of wire on the top shelf, he knocked over a wooden box he did not remember placing there. It fell open on the dirt floor, and a letter spilled out, yellowed and creased, written in a hand he recognized with a jolt that went through him like cold water. His father's handwriting. Caleb Brennan had not died of consumption. That was the story Reverend Caldwell told the town, and the town believed it because you believed a minister, especially one who had baptized half the county. But Marcus knew the truth. Caleb Brennan had saddled a horse one October morning when Marcus was 14 years old and ridden south without a word. No letter, no explanation, no goodbye, just the sound of hooves on hard-packed dirt getting fainter until there was nothing left but silence, and the question that silence always asks. Marcus picked up the letter. He did not read it. He struck a match from the tin on the workbench and held the flame to the corner of the paper and watched it curl and blacken and turn to ash in his hand. Then he went to fix the fence. He was halfway across the north pasture when he heard the shouting. Not a scream, not a cry for help. A stream of furious words in a language he did not understand, sharp and commanding, the kind of voice that was not asking for rescue, but demanding obedience from something that was not listening. He grabbed the rifle he kept slung across his saddle and ran toward the sound. Beyond the fence line where Redstone property met Red Feather land, a girl was being dragged across rocky ground by a Mustang she had roped around the neck. The lariat was wrapped twice around her left wrist, and the horse was panicking, lunging sideways in short, violent bursts. And the girl was not panicking at all. She was angry. She was cursing at the horse in Apache with the kind of focused fury that suggested this was a personal disagreement between the two of them, and the horse was losing the argument. Marcus did not scoop her up like a hero. He raised the rifle and fired a single shot into the dirt 5 feet ahead of the Mustang. The crack echoed off the ridgeline, and the horse startled hard, planting its hooves, nostrils flaring, sides heaving. In that half-second of stillness, the girl freed her wrist from the lariat and rolled clear, coming up on her feet in one smooth motion like a cat tipped off a fence. She stood there with blood on her hands and dust on her knees, and her jaw set at an angle that dared the entire world to say something about it. Then she turned on him. "I did not need you to shoot. I needed 10 more seconds." She spoke English clearly, but with a rhythm underneath it, the cadence of someone who thinks in one language and translates into another. She was maybe 17, dark hair tangled with red dust, wearing a cotton dress that had seen better seasons, and boots that had walked more miles than most men twice her age. There was a book tucked into her belt, dog-eared and water-stained, an English reader that looked like it had been read 100 times. Marcus, caught off guard by her tone and her eyes and the blood running down her wrist, said the only thing that came to mind. "You are welcome." I did not say thank you. That was how Marcus Brennan met Wren Redfeather. Not with gratitude, not with tenderness. With a gunshot and an argument and the particular kind of stubbornness that happens when two people who do not know how to back down meet for the first time. She explained, while wrapping her wrist with a strip torn from her hem, that she had been tracking this Mustang for 3 weeks. She knew its patterns. She knew where it watered and where it slept, and which sounds spooked it and which calmed it down. She did not want to break it. That was the white man's way, she said, and she did not mean it as a compliment. "You do not break a horse," she told him, testing the wrap on her wrist with a wince she tried to hide. "You give it a reason to stay." Marcus did not understand that sentence. He filed it away without knowing it would define the rest of his life. He noticed the book in her belt but did not ask about it. She noticed him noticing and said nothing. He went home that night thinking about a girl who cursed at horses in Apache, read books in English, and looked at the world like it owed her an apology she intended to collect. That evening at supper, he mentioned the red feather girl to his grandfather. Caldwell set down his fork and looked at Marcus with an expression he had never seen before, the look of a man remembering a debt he hoped no one would ever come to collect. "Jacob's daughter," Caldwell said quietly. Then, after a silence that lasted long enough for the lamplight to flicker and settle, "Stay away from that family, Marcus." He did not explain why. He never did. But his hands, which always shook now, went perfectly still. Wren Redfeather knew 3 things about Marcus Brennan before she ever spoke to him. He fixed fences wrong. He talked to horses when he thought no one was listening. And he was the only white man in the valley who never locked his door at night. She was not sure what the 3rd thing meant, but she filed it away the way her mother had taught her to file away animal tracks. You never know which trail matters until you need to follow it. The cabin where Wren lived with her father was not what the people in town imagined when they pictured an Apache family on the edge of their valley. It was not squalor. It was not primitive. It was a home built with the same care any family gives to the place where they sleep and eat and keep the things that matter. Her mother, Nopal, had planted an herb garden along the south wall, sage and yarrow and wild mint, and Wren still tended it 2 years after Nopal's death, because letting it go wild would feel like letting go of the last living thing her mother had touched. Jacob's hand carved trail maps hung on the east wall, detailed renderings of every ridge and creek within 30 miles, each one marked with symbols Wren had learned to read before she could read English. In the corner by the window where the light was best, Wren kept her books, 3 of them. An English reader she had traded a deerskin pouch for at a traveling merchant's wagon. A Bible that Reverend Caldwell had given her father years ago, which Jacob kept out of courtesy rather than conviction. And a slim volume of territorial law that she had found water-damaged in a trash heap behind the land office in town, and dried page by page in the sun until every word was legible. Jacob Redfeather was not a broken man. He was a hunter of considerable skill, a tracker who had once worked contracts for the cavalry and earned enough respect from the officers to be addressed by name rather than by the general term they used for the Apache scouts who did the dangerous work while white men took the credit. He was a careful father who checked the locks at night and taught his daughter to read animal sign before sunrise, and never once raised his voice in anger, though Wren sometimes wished he would because the silence was worse. But she noticed things. He spoke with Reverend Caldwell in low voices after dark, conversations that stopped when she appeared. She had once stood outside the window and listened long enough to catch a single word, silver, and a phrase, keep it hidden, before her father's instinct for being watched made him glance toward the glass, and she had to duck away. She knew he kept an old rolled-up map in a leather tube under his bed. Spanish writing on yellowed paper. She had seen it, but never opened it. She respected her father's privacy, for now. The Mustang kept crossing the fence line onto Brennan land. This was either a problem or an opportunity, depending on how you looked at it, and Wren Redfeather had never in her life looked at anything and seen only a problem. She went back to the fence the next day. Marcus Brennan was there, as she expected, mending the section where the wire had come loose. He worked with the focused intensity of a man who believed that if he could just get this one stretch of fence to hold, everything else in his life would stay in place too. It was, Wren thought, a very white way to think about things. "You are doing it wrong," she said. He looked up, startled. Sweat ran down his face, and his shirt was dark with it, and there was red clay under every fingernail, probably under his skin too, the way this land got into you. "The wire is too tight," she continued, walking along the fence and testing it with her hand. "When the cold comes, it will contract and snap. You need slack. Things that cannot bend will break." He stared at her for a moment like he was not sure whether she was talking about fences or something else. Then he loosened the wire without saying a word. They worked in silence for a while, and the silence was not uncomfortable the way silence between strangers usually is. It was the kind of silence that happens when two people are doing something with their hands and their minds are free to wander. And sometimes their wandering brings them to the same place. Over the following weeks, they met at the fence line, the border between his land and what she considered hers. The Mustang kept crossing over. They began working together to tame it, not by plan but by necessity. And through the work, character emerged the way it always does when you watch someone closely enough. Marcus revealed, in the clumsy, halting way of a young man who's not used to talking about himself, that he was terrified of losing the ranch. Not because he loved it, though he did, but because it was all his grandfather had left, and he could not bear to be the one who let it fail. He started to say something about his father once and stopped mid-sentence like he had walked into a wall he had not seen coming. Wren noticed the cutoff, filed it away. She told him about her mother, how Nopal had said you could judge a person's whole character by watching how they treated an animal that could not do anything for them. Marcus watched Wren stand perfectly still in the blazing sun for 40 minutes, not moving, barely breathing, until the Mustang came to her on its own terms. It nuzzled her outstretched hand, and she whispered something in Apache that Marcus could not understand, but somehow felt in his chest like the low note of a bell. "You do not chase what you want," she told him. "You become someone worth coming to. The horse decides, not you." He was 19 and did not have the vocabulary for what he was feeling, so he just stood there, sweating in the sun, learning patience from a girl who made it look like the most natural thing in the world. In late July, Reverend Caldwell invited the Red Feather family for supper. It was the first time in years the two families had shared a table, and the meal was awkward in the way meals between different worlds always are. Long silences filled with the sound of forks on tin plates. Caldwell saying grace while Jacob bowed his head out of courtesy, Wren watching everything with eyes that missed nothing. After dinner, Jacob and Caldwell stepped outside. Their voices carried through the screen door, low and urgent, and Wren caught fragments. The words land and promise, and when the time comes. She looked at Marcus. He was listening too, but shook his head slightly. He did not know what it meant either. They sat on the porch steps while the sky did what Colorado skies do in July, turning 16 shades of orange before giving up and going dark. Crickets started up in the tall grass. Somewhere in the distance a coyote called and another answered. Wren asked directly because she had never learned to be indirect. "Do you ever think about getting married?" Marcus nearly choked on his coffee. She waited for him to finish coughing, then explained. In her mother's tradition, when two families lived close and their children got along, talking about the future was not shameful. It was practical. She was not proposing. She was asking if he was the kind of man who kept his word. Marcus, 19 and foolish in the way that only young men who have not yet been broken by the world can be, wiped coffee from his chin and said the words that would follow him for the rest of his life. "If 8 years from now you still want to marry a man who cannot do anything except fix fences wrong, I will be right here." He said it half joking. She did not laugh. She looked at him the way she looked at the Mustang, patient, assessing. deciding whether he was worth the time it would take to trust him. Then she said, 8 years. I will remember. He smiled because he thought she was playing along. It would be 8 years, and a world of trouble before Marcus Brennan learned that Wren Redfeather had never played along with anything in her life. There are 3 ways to lose everything in the West: slowly, by drought; quickly, by fire; or overnight, by a man in a good suit who knows exactly which clerk to bribe. Marcus Brennan would learn all 3 before he turned 20. The man in the good suit arrived in Durango on a Tuesday in August of 1898, riding a black gelding that cost more than most ranch hands made in a year. His name was Edmund Hargrove, and he came from Denver with 2 associates and a leather case full of documents, and the particular kind of smile that made you want to check your pockets after shaking his hand. He was not what Marcus expected a villain to look like. He was charming, generous, bought rounds at the Long Branch Saloon and talked about progress and railroad jobs and the bright future waiting for anyone smart enough to get on board early. Half the town was ready to name a street after him within a week. Marcus watched him from a distance at first, the way you watch a storm building on the horizon, not yet sure if it will pass over or come straight at you. He noticed things. The land Hargrove kept asking about. The parcels he wanted to buy or lease or survey lay precisely on the boundary between Redstone Ranch and the Red Feather property. Coincidence, maybe. Marcus did not believe in coincidence, but he did not yet have proof of anything except a feeling that sat in his gut like a stone. At the general store one afternoon, Marcus overheard Hargrove talking with Sally Hayes, the woman who ran the place with an iron fist and a memory longer than the Arkansas River. Hargrove was buying supplies and making small talk, and somewhere in the conversation he mentioned his son. The boy lost his mother young, Hargrove said, and for just a moment the smooth mask slipped and something real showed through. Never quite recovered. Some wounds just do not close, no matter how much time you give them. Sally Hayes nodded the way she did when she was filing something away. Marcus filed it away too, though he did not know then that it mattered. He would not understand until 8 years later when the son appeared and the sins of the father came due. The trap closed around Jacob Redfeather with the precision of a machine designed by men who understood exactly how the West worked, and how to make it work against the people it was not built to protect. It started with Morrison, the whiskey trader who operated out of a tent on the edge of town. Morrison produced a promissory note bearing Jacob's signature, a debt of $85 for goods received. Jacob said he had never signed it. Morrison said he had witnesses. The truth, as it usually does, lay somewhere in between. Morrison had gotten Jacob drunk deliberately, one of those long, slow evenings by the fire where a man who is lonely and tired lets his guard down because the whiskey is warm and the company is easy. Jacob had signed something. He could not remember what. But the signature was real, and in a territorial court that was all that mattered. $85. It might as well have been $1,000. Jacob could not pay. He worked odd jobs, hunting and tracking, and what he earned kept his daughter fed and the cabin standing, but there was nothing left over for debts manufactured by men with better lawyers. Then came the warrant. Horse theft, dated 3 weeks prior. This one was pure fabrication. No signature, no witnesses, just a piece of paper filed by a clerk who owed favors to men who owed favors to Edmund Hargrove. But Jacob Redfeather was Apache, and an Apache man accused of horse theft in Colorado in 1898 did not get a trial. He got a verdict. Marcus heard about the warrant from Clay Mercer, who was not yet sheriff but worked as a deputy, and heard things before they became official. Clay rode out to Redstone one evening and told Marcus over coffee that the Redfeather family was in trouble. Warrant came in from the territorial court, Clay said. Horse theft. Somebody filed it through Hargrove's clerk, a man named Patrick Stiles. I do not like the smell of it, Marcus. I do not like it at all. Marcus rode to the Red Feather cabin that same evening and found chaos. Wren was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, jaw set at that angle he was beginning to recognize as the one she wore when she was trying not to cry. Jacob was inside, packing. We are leaving, Jacob said when Marcus came through the door. His voice was flat, the voice of a man who has already made his decision and is done explaining it. "You cannot just leave," Marcus said. "If the warrant is false, we can fight it. We can go to the judge." Jacob looked at him with the kind of patience that borders on pity. "I have been Apache my whole life, son. You do not know what that means in a white man's court. They do not need proof. They need a verdict. And they already have one written." "Fight," Wren said from the doorway. Her voice cracked on the word. "We should fight." Jacob turned to her, and his expression broke just enough for Marcus to see the anguish underneath. "There are things about this land you do not know, Wren. Things that would change us if we stayed." She did not understand. Neither did Marcus. Neither did the reader. Not yet. But the words hung in the air like smoke, waiting to be understood at a later time when understanding would cost more than ignorance. That night, a storm broke over the plains, not the gentle rain of summer, but the violent sideways kind that turns red dirt roads into rivers and makes horses scream in their stalls. Lightning split the sky so close Marcus could smell the ozone, sharp and electric, and thunder rolled across the valley like God dragging furniture across a wooden floor. He was in the barn closing the doors when Wren appeared. She did not knock. She came through the rain like it was not there, soaked through, her hair plastered to her face, her eyes burning with a fury that had nothing to do with the weather. "What did your grandfather promise my father?" she demanded. Water ran off her in streams, pooling on the barn floor between them. "I heard them talking. There are papers. Something about land. Does your grandfather keep his word, or does he not?" Marcus stood there with rain hammering the roof above them, and lantern light making shadows dance on the walls, and the girl he was beginning to care about staring at him like he was on trial. "I do not know," he said. "I swear to you, Wren. I do not know anything about papers or promises. My grandfather does not tell me everything." She searched his face the way she read animal tracks, looking for the truth underneath the surface. And she did not find it, or did not believe she found it. And something closed behind her eyes like a door swinging shut. "You are lying," she said quietly, "or you are useless. I am not sure which is worse." The words hit him like a slap. Not because they were cruel, but because there was just enough truth in them to leave a mark. He had not asked his grandfather about Jacob. He had not questioned the late-night conversations on the porch. He had not pushed. And now it was too late. She turned to leave, and he caught her arm. Not hard, just enough to stop her. "Wren, wait." She looked at his hand on her arm, looked at his face. The rain was so loud they almost had to shout. "8 years," she said. "I will come back. And when I do, you had better have an answer about your grandfather's promise and about yours." Then she pulled free and walked into the storm, and Marcus followed her to the porch and stood there getting soaked while he watched the red feather wagon, already loaded, already pointed toward the road, lurch forward into the darkness. Jacob drove. Wren sat in the back, facing behind, and through the sheets of rain Marcus could see her face, pale and fierce and young, staring at him until the storm swallowed her whole. She mouthed something he could not hear over the thunder, but he knew the shape of the words. "Do not forget." He stood in the downpour until the lantern on the back of their wagon dimmed and vanished behind the rise of the hill. Then he went inside, water running off him like grief, and sat at the kitchen table in the dark. The next morning, still wearing his damp clothes, he confronted his grandfather. "What did you promise Jacob Red Feather?" Caldwell was sitting in his chair by the window, a blanket on his lap, though the morning was warm. He stared out at the eastern ridge for a long time, long enough for the light to shift and the shadows to change shape. "There are promises a man hides not from shame," the old minister said slowly, "but because he fears what keeping them will cost." He would say nothing more, and it would be 7 years until the old man was dead and buried before Marcus understood that his grandfather had carried this secret to his grave. That winter, sorting through his grandfather's desk, Marcus found a photograph he had never seen. Two young men standing together in cavalry uniforms, one white and one Apache, somewhere in a high mountain valley with snow on the peaks behind them. On the back, in Caldwell's careful handwriting, were the words, "Wind River, 1875. The day Jacob saved my life." Marcus put the photograph in his pocket. He did not take it out again for 7 years. Some truths need time to ripen before they are ready to be held. People say time heals all wounds. Marcus Brennan knew that was a lie. Time does not heal anything. It just teaches you how to walk on broken bones. 1899. He tore the house apart looking for the deed he did not yet know was a deed. He searched the church where his grandfather had preached for 40 years, checking under pews and inside hymnals and behind the altar. He searched the barn, the smokehouse, the root cellar. He went through every drawer and every shelf in Caldwell's study, reading letters and receipts and sermons until the words blurred together. Nothing. His grandfather watched him from his chair with the expression of a man enduring a wound he had chosen not to treat. "Tell me," Marcus said, standing in the study doorway covered in dust and frustration. "Whatever you promised Jacob, tell me." Caldwell shook his head slowly. "When the time is right." "The time is right now. His daughter thinks I'm a liar. She thinks I'm protecting you." "Maybe you should be," the old man said softly. And that was the end of it. Marcus almost rode south that autumn. He saddled his horse and rode to the property line where Redstone Ranch ended and the open territory began. He sat there for an hour looking down the road that led to Arizona and New Mexico, and all the places a man might go if he had someone to find. Then he heard his father's voice in his head, the voice he had been trying to silence since he was 14. Some things are not worth chasing. He hated that voice. He obeyed it anyway. He turned the horse around and went home and fixed the fence. Far to the south, in Arizona territory, Wren Red Feather lay on a blanket beside a dying campfire and hated the stars for being beautiful when everything else was ugly. Jacob picked up tracking work where he could find it. Odd jobs for ranchers and sometimes for the army. Enough to keep them fed, but never enough to stay anywhere long. They were always moving, always looking over their shoulders, always one knock on the door away from running again. Wren did not speak to her father for 3 weeks after they left Durango. She slept facing away from him. When she did speak, it was in short, clipped sentences stripped of everything except necessity. She was not punishing him. She was trying to understand how a man who had taught her to face down a charging bull could not face down a piece of paper. She carried one thing from Durango besides the clothes on her back. A book, an English reader, dog-eared and water-stained, that Marcus Brennan had lent her at the fence line one afternoon when she mentioned wanting to practice her reading. She told herself she had kept it by accident. She knew she was lying. 1901. Marcus Brennan courted Bethany Cole, the pharmacist's daughter, because that was what a man in his position was supposed to do. She was kind and pretty and laughed easily and fit perfectly into the shape of the life everyone expected him to live. They danced at a barn dance in September, Bethany warm and light in his arms, the fiddle playing something sweet that should have made his heart feel full. It did not. Bethany wanted Denver, a bigger house, gas lamps and paved streets and a life that meant something beyond fences and cattle. Marcus could not explain why he would not leave this land, could not put into words the feeling that if he left, the last thread connecting him to his grandfather's promises would snap, and he would become the kind of man who abandons things, like his father. They parted on a Tuesday in October, standing beside the fence, which was still crooked because some things resist fixing no matter how many times you try. "You are waiting for something, Marcus," Bethany said, not unkindly. "I am just not it." He watched her ride back toward town and felt nothing except a dull relief, which made him feel worse than grief would have. In Santa Fe, New Mexico, Wren Red Feather walked through the doors of a Catholic mission school and into a world she had not known existed. Sister Catherine, a tall Irish woman with hands rough from laundry and eyes sharp enough to cut glass, took one look at the Apache girl standing in the doorway with dust on her boots and fire in her expression and said, "You look like trouble. Come in." Wren excelled. Not because she was naturally gifted, that is a story comfortable people tell about uncomfortable lives, but because anger is a better engine than talent, and Wren Red Feather had enough anger to power a locomotive. She wanted to understand the legal system that had evicted her family. She wanted to know the words they used, and the tricks they played, and the places where the machinery of law had gaps wide enough for a determined person to slip through. Sister Catherine recognized something fierce in her and taught her after hours, by lamplight, from books that were not part of the regular curriculum. Contract law, property rights, the territorial statutes of Colorado. One evening in the mission library, Wren found a passage in a legal text that made her hand stop moving across the page. Forged warrants can be challenged through comparison of handwriting samples. If the signature on a warrant does not match verified samples from the issuing authority, the warrant may be rendered void. She copied the passage into her journal. She was 19 years old and she was already building a case. She just did not know it yet. 1903. Word reached Durango that Edmund Hargrove was dead. Apoplexy, they said. Struck down at his desk in Denver at the age of 64. His son Nathaniel inherited the business, the debts, and the ambitions. Marcus heard the news at the general store and thought nothing of it. The reader knows better. In Boston, Massachusetts, Wren Red Feather walked through a world of gas lamps and cobblestone streets and libraries with more books than people. And she was not dazzled. She was studying. She had left Santa Fe at 21 to work as a governess for a wealthy family named Whitfield, caring for their two young daughters while quietly absorbing everything she could about how power works from the inside. How wealthy men talk when they think only their own kind is listening. What their lawyers do. Where the gaps are in their confidence. She met Edward Whitfield, the family's eldest son, at a charity gala she was not supposed to attend. He was 26, educated at Harvard. Progressive in the way that wealthy young men sometimes are when they have never had to test their principles against anything harder than a dinner conversation. He was kind. He took her to restaurants. He called her brilliant. After 3 months of courtship that felt more like a gentle siege, he proposed with a diamond ring and promises of a life in high society. And Wren almost said yes, not from love, from exhaustion. She was tired of fighting. Tired of being the only face like hers in every room. Tired of carrying 8 years of anger like a stone she could not put down. Saying yes to Edward would mean rest. It would mean safety. It would mean never having to explain herself again to people who would never understand anyway. The night before she planned to give her answer, she sat in her small room on the 3rd floor of the Whitfield house and opened the book she had carried from Colorado. She had read it so many times the spine was cracked and the pages fell open on their own, and she knew every word by heart. But she opened it anyway because sometimes the familiar is the only comfort a person has. A piece of paper fell out, tucked into the back cover, folded once, written in the blocky handwriting of a 19-year-old rancher who probably spent 10 minutes working up the nerve to put pen to paper. Return whenever. I am not going anywhere. One line, that was all. But it landed in her chest like a stone in still water and sent ripples outward in every direction. Somewhere in Colorado there was a man who said little and meant all of it. A man who had not chased her because she had told him not to. A man who, if he was anything like the boy she remembered, was probably still fixing that fence wrong. She told Edward no the next morning. He called her ungrateful, said she would die in obscurity among backward people. She walked out of the Whitfield house without looking back and caught a train west within the week. 1905. Reverend Thomas Caldwell died in his sleep on a Tuesday night in March, aged 82. He went quietly, which was unlike him. In life he had been a man of volume and conviction, quoting scripture at full voice and building fences with a hammer that could be heard across the valley. In death, he left behind a ranch, a reputation, and a grandson who stood at his graveside in the spring rain and felt the last tether to his family's history go slack. Half the town attended the funeral. The other half sent flowers. Whatever else Thomas Caldwell had been, whatever secrets he had kept and promises he had hidden, he had been the moral backbone of Durango for 40 years, and his absence left a hollow that the wind seemed to find and whistle through. In the will, there was no mention of Red Feather, no mention of any deed, no mention of promises made to Apache families or debts of honor stretching back to 1875. Marcus read the document 3 times, looking for something that was not there, feeling the disappointment curdle into something worse. But there was a sealed envelope with his name on it, separate from the will. Inside, a single slip of paper bearing 5 words in his grandfather's careful hand. Psalm 23. Forgive me. Marcus stared at it for a long time. Then he put it in a drawer and lived another year, carrying a riddle he could not solve. 1,500 miles to the east, then south, then west again, as Red Feather followed a trail of information that had taken 6 years to build. A network of Apache and Navajo families who shared news across territories the way water finds its way downhill, always moving, always connecting. She heard that a Denver investor named Nathaniel Hargrove was buying land options around Durango. She heard that Patrick Stiles, the clerk who had filed her father's warrant, now worked directly for Hargrove. She used her legal knowledge to investigate, visited the Territorial Land Office in Santa Fe, requested records, cross-referenced dates, wrote letters, read responses. And one afternoon, in a dusty file room that smelled of old paper and lamp oil, she found a copy of a deed, not luck. 6 years of preparation meeting one moment of opportunity. The deed was dated June 12, 1898. It granted 50 acres of land adjacent to Redstone Ranch to Jacob Red Feather and his heirs in perpetuity, in recognition of friendship and debt of honor, signed by Reverend Thomas Caldwell. Witnessed by Hank Donovan and Samuel Porter. Wren held the paper in her hands and felt the ground shift beneath her. Everything she had believed, that Caldwell had broken his word, that Marcus had known and hidden it, that her father had been abandoned by the people who claimed to be their friends, all of it crumbled like a wall built on sand. Caldwell had kept his promise. He had put it in writing, and someone had buried it. She bought a horse, a spotted Appaloosa with a steady gait and calm eyes. She packed everything she owned, which was not much, and she rode west toward Colorado with the deed in her saddlebag and a question in her heart. Not whether Marcus would remember her, but whether he deserved to. Year 7, Marcus stopped looking toward the road. Year 8, on a September afternoon, when the aspens had gone gold and the wind carried the first bite of winter, a woman appeared on the red dust road, and he realized he had never truly stopped waiting. He just had not known what he was waiting for. Now, watching her ride toward him like an answer to a question he had been afraid to ask, he knew, and the knowing terrified him. She rode through his gate like she owned the place. He stood there with a hammer in one hand and a fence post in the other, and for 3 full seconds he had no idea who she was, which told Red Feather everything she needed to know about how much Marcus Brennan had or had not been thinking about her for 8 years. This was where the story caught up with itself. The flash forward from the beginning, the woman on the Appaloosa and the rancher with the hammer, was no longer a mystery. It was a collision. Marcus saw a woman. Dark hair braided with a strip of red cloth, buckskin jacket worn smooth at the elbows, turquoise pendant catching the September light. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with features, and everything to do with the way she sat a horse, like the animal was an extension of her own body, like they had agreed on the terms of their partnership, and neither had any complaints. He did not recognize her. 8 years had done what 8 years do. The girl he remembered had been 17, with scraped knees and a temper that ran hot. This woman was something forged, shaped by distance and years, and whatever fires she had walked through to get here. Then she spoke, and the world tilted. "Rancher, you promised you would marry me a long time ago. Did you think I would forget?" His first response was not emotional. It was defensive, which told Wren something about the kind of walls Marcus Brennan had built around himself in her absence. "I said if you still wanted to. That is two different things." They stared at each other across 10 feet of red dirt and 8 years of silence, and neither moved first. This was not the tearful reunion of a love story. This was two people with unresolved business, circling each other like animals who are not yet sure whether the other is friend or threat. Wren dismounted. She did it with the easy grace of someone who has spent more time on horseback than on solid ground. She pulled a folded document from her saddlebag and walked to the ranch house porch, past Marcus, past the fence post he had been setting, past the hammer he was still holding like he had forgotten it was there, and she laid the document on the kitchen table. "Sit down," she said. "We need to talk." She told him everything, the deed, the 50 acres, Caldwell's promise to Jacob, written in ink and witnessed by 2 men. Nathaniel Hargrove, the son of Edmund, who had inherited his father's debts and his father's ambitions, and was buying up land options around Durango with the focused hunger of a man who knew exactly what lay beneath the soil. Silver. There was a silver mine on those 50 acres worth more money than either of them could imagine, and Hargrove wanted it badly enough to forge warrants and drive families from their homes and buy the loyalty of half the town. Marcus listened. And as he listened, 2 feelings fought inside him like wolves in a pen. The first was relief, deep and clean, that his grandfather had kept his word after all. The second was shame, just as deep and nowhere near as clean, that he had not found the deed himself, that he had stopped looking, that Wren had done in 6 years of patient investigation what he had failed to do in 8 years of living in the same house where the answer was hidden. "You had 8 years to find that deed," Wren said, and her voice was not angry. It was worse than angry. It was tired. "Your grandfather told you, Psalm 23. Did you even look?" "I looked everywhere. I did not know what it meant." "You did not look hard enough. You stopped looking, just like your—" She caught herself. The word father hung in the air between them, unspoken but loud as a gunshot. She had almost compared him to the man who abandoned him. The cruelest thing she could have said. She did not say it, but the fact that she thought it was enough. "I am not here for a reunion, Marcus," she said quietly. "I am here because my family's land is being stolen, and you are the only person in this valley who might care enough to help. If that makes you feel used, I am sorry. But I did not ride 400 miles for your feelings." Before he could answer, the sound of hoofbeats echoed across the open plain. 3 riders came through the front gate, hard and fast, dust rising behind them in a cloud the color of rust. Hired men. Marcus recognized the type. Rough faces, worn leather, the particular swagger of men who get paid to make problems go away and do not much care about the methods. The lead rider was thick-shouldered with a scar running down his left cheek. He reined in 20 feet from the porch, eyes scanning the property with the practiced efficiency of someone used to measuring threats. "Afternoon," the scarred man said. "We are looking for an Apache girl. Rode through here about an hour ago. You seen her?" "I see a lot of people," Marcus replied. He had stepped off the porch and positioned himself between the riders and the house. His hand rested at his side, close to his hip, but not on the revolver. Not yet. "This is open country. Do not play games, rancher. She has got something that does not belong to her. We need it back." "I have not seen anyone matching that description." The scarred man looked at Marcus for a long moment. Then his eyes moved past Marcus to the Appaloosa tied at the hitching post, the spotted horse, the saddlebag. "That is a real pretty horse," he said. "Apache saddle work, looks like." Marcus did not blink. "It is mine." The scarred man smiled without warmth. Then he did something that changed the nature of everything. He drew his revolver, not aimed at Marcus, not aimed at anyone, but at the corral where Marcus's ranch horses stood. He sighted on the big bay mare that stood closest to the fence, the mare that had been a Mustang once, 8 years ago, the horse that Marcus and Wren had tamed together at the fence line. The gunshot cracked across the valley like a whip. The mare screamed once, a sound Marcus would hear in his sleep for years, and dropped. "That is what happens to things that get in the way," the scarred man said. He holstered his gun. "Tell your Apache friend we will be back." Marcus's hand was on his revolver before the echo faded. He fired once, wide, deliberate, close enough that the scarred man's horse shied hard and nearly threw him. A warning. "Next one will not miss," Marcus said, and his voice was a thing made of iron and ice. "Get off my land." The 3 riders exchanged glances. Then they turned and rode back toward town, leaving dust and silence and a dead horse bleeding in the red dirt. Wren came off the porch. She walked to the corral, where the mare lay on its side, eyes already glassing over, blood darkening the clay beneath it. She knelt and placed her hand on the horse's neck, the neck she had stroked 1,000 times when it was still a wild young Mustang learning to trust the girl who had given it a reason to stay. She whispered something in Apache. Marcus could not hear the words. He did not need to. When she stood, her face was stone. "Now do you understand?" she said. Red dust on her hands, red dust on the horse, red dust on everything. "This is not about a wedding promise. This is war." Marcus looked at her and saw for the first time that the 17-year-old girl who had cursed at a wild horse in the summer heat was gone, long dead. And the woman standing in her place was more dangerous than any man with a gun. Nathaniel Hargrove knew something that most land thieves did not. You do not need a gun to kill a community. You just need enough money to buy its loyalty. And in Durango, Colorado, the price was lower than he had expected. He sat alone in his room at the Strater Hotel, the finest accommodation Durango could offer, which was not saying much. A letter from his Denver office lay open on the desk. Creditors. Again. His father, Edmund, had left behind an empire made of paper and promises, debts dressed as assets, contracts built on handshakes with men who are now dead or claiming amnesia. The railroad contracts that kept 200 workers and their families fed depended entirely on securing the mineral rights to the land south of Durango. Without the silver, the whole structure collapsed. He opened his vest pocket and took out the photograph he kept there, small enough to fit in his palm. Eleanor, 28 years old when she died, trying to bring their child into the world. She did not survive. Neither did the child. Nathaniel was 33 then, and something inside him went dark like a lamp blown out by a wind too strong to fight. 5 years later, the lamp was still dark. He told himself the math was simple. 1 Apache family, 50 acres. Against 200 families who depended on him for their bread and their roofs and their children's shoes. When you put it that way, the answer was obvious. The math was always obvious when you left out the people who could not speak for themselves. He poured himself a whiskey and stared at Eleanor's face until the glass was empty. Marcus and Wren spent 3 days knocking on doors, and the doors taught them things they did not want to learn. Some people said yes immediately. Sally Hayes, who ran the general store and had known Reverend Caldwell for 30 years, planted herself behind her counter with her arms crossed and declared that if Thomas Caldwell said that land belonged to the Red Feathers, then it belonged to the Red Feathers. And she would testify to that in front of God, and everybody and anyone who did not like it could take their business to the next county. Hank Donovan was next. They found him at the livery stable, grooming a horse with the careful attention he gave to everything. He was 71 years old, weathered as old saddle leather, with eyes clouded by age but a mind sharp enough to cut wire. He remembered signing the deed. He remembered the date and the heat and the way Caldwell had read the words aloud like he was delivering a sermon. He would testify, he said. He was too old to be afraid of bullies. But others were not so willing. Doc Crawford listened to their case and shook his head with the pained expression of a man caught between two kinds of doing right. Hargrove had funded the new medical clinic. Without that money, people would go untreated. People might die. "I believe you," Doc said, standing in his office doorway with his bag in his hand, probably heading to a house call because Doc Crawford was always heading to a house call. "But I cannot testify against the man who keeps this clinic open, not yet. Find me another way." Two ranchers on the east side of town said they would think about it, which meant no. A family near the river said they had heard Hargrove was bringing railroad jobs and did not want to get on the wrong side of progress. A shopkeeper on Main Street closed his door without opening it. "They are afraid," Wren said as they rode back toward the ranch, the afternoon sun painting long shadows ahead of them. "Or they have calculated that Hargrove is the better bet. I cannot decide which is worse." "Both," Marcus said. "But we do not need everyone. We need enough." They had Sally. They had Hank. They had Clay, who would investigate the forged warrant as sheriff. And they had themselves. "We need the original deed," Wren said. "The copy I found at the land office will not hold up against Hargrove's lawyers. We need the real thing." Marcus had been thinking about this since the morning, turning the puzzle over in his mind the way he turned fence posts, looking for the angle that made everything fit. "Psalm 23, he said. Wren looked at him. "My grandfather left me a note when he died. It said Psalm 23, forgive me. I did not understand it." "I thought he was quoting scripture because that is what he did, quote scripture when he did not know what else to say." "The church," Wren said, understanding before he finished. "He hid it in the church." They rode into town as the sun touched the western peaks. The old Methodist church stood at the edge of Durango, a simple wooden structure with a bell tower that had gone silent when Caldwell died. No one had taken over the pulpit. The door was unlocked because in Durango you did not lock churches, even empty ones. Inside, the air smelled of candle wax and old wood, and the particular kind of dust that accumulates in places where people once gathered and no longer do. Pews stood in neat rows. The pulpit dominated the front, massive and hand-built. The same dark oak Caldwell had used for everything because he believed in using what the land provided. A Bible rested on the pulpit, large, leather-bound, the pages edged in gold that had faded to a dull yellow. Marcus opened it with hands that were not entirely steady. Psalm 23. There, pressed between the pages like a dried flower, was a folded piece of parchment. His hands shook as he lifted it out. The paper was old but well preserved, the edges slightly yellowed, the wax seal intact. He unfolded it carefully. The deed, the original, same text as the copy Wren had found, but with the actual seal, the actual signatures in ink that had faded but remained perfectly legible. Witnessed by Hank Donovan and Samuel Porter. Notarized by Porter. Dated June 12, 1898. "He hid it in Psalm 23, Wren whispered. The Lord is my shepherd." "His favorite passage," Marcus said. "He quoted it at every funeral, every wedding, every time someone needed comfort." But there was something else. A letter folded inside the deed, written on different paper in Caldwell's hand. Addressed to Jacob Red Feather. Never sent. Marcus unfolded it and read aloud. "Jacob, I have hidden the deed where I know Marcus will find it when the time comes, though I pray that time is far off. I know Edmund Hargrove will come for this land. I know what he is capable of. I hid the deed to protect you because I believed that if you held it, Hargrove would come for you with worse than warrants. I still believe that. But I know now that I was wrong to take the choice away from you. You deserve to know. You deserve to decide for yourself whether to fight or flee. I decided for you. And in doing so, I failed the friendship I was trying to protect. Forgive me, old friend. I kept my promise about the land. But I broke a deeper one about trust. Your brother, in all things that matter. Thomas." Silence filled the church. Wren took the letter from Marcus's hand and read it again, silently, her lips moving over the words. When she finished, she folded it carefully and placed it inside her jacket, next to her heart. "Men," she said quietly. "You always think protecting someone means deciding for them." Marcus heard the echo in those words. She was talking about his grandfather, about her father who had run to protect her, and about Marcus himself, though he did not yet see how. That understanding would come later, at a cost. They rode back toward the ranch as rain began to fall, light at first, then harder. The kind of autumn rain that feels like the sky is washing itself clean. They took shelter in the old hay barn at the edge of Marcus's property, sitting on bales while the rain drummed on the tin roof above them. They did not kiss. They were not ready for that. Not with 8 years of hurt still unresolved between them. But something shifted. "There was a man in Boston," Wren said, not looking at him. "He was kind. He proposed. I almost said yes." "There was a girl in Durango," Marcus replied. "She was everything she should have been, and she was not enough." "Why not?" "Because she was not you." "I did not know that was the reason at the time, but it was." Wren was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that Marcus would remember for the rest of his life. "You are not what I need, Marcus. You are what I chose to come back for. There is a difference." He did not fully understand it yet, but he was learning. The next morning, a boy arrived at the ranch at dawn, face white as bleached cotton. He was maybe 12, one of the town kids who ran errands for pennies, and he stood on the porch with his hat in his hands and his mouth working before any words came out. "Mr. Donovan," the boy stammered, "last night. His stable caught fire. He did not. He did not get out." The boy was still talking when Wren turned and saw Marcus's face go the color of ash, and she understood that the war she had declared had just drawn its first blood. Hank Donovan survived 71 years, 3 range wars, 2 killing winters, and a mule named Jezebel that once kicked him clean over a fence. He died in his sleep from a fire that started in his stable and spread to the room where he kept his cot. A fire that smelled of kerosene and moved too fast and too hot to be anything natural, though no one could prove otherwise, which is exactly how men like Nathaniel Hargrove preferred their violence. Deniable. The funeral was held on a Wednesday, the kind of cold, bright October day that makes the mountains look sharp enough to cut the sky. Half the town came. The other half sent flowers. Hank Donovan had not been a wealthy man or a powerful one, but he had been a fixture of Durango for so long that his absence felt like someone had removed a load-bearing wall from a building everyone took for granted. Nathaniel Hargrove attended. He stood near the back in his Denver suit and his polished boots and placed flowers on the coffin, with an expression of what appeared to be genuine sorrow. Marcus watched him from across the graveyard and felt his hands curl into fists so tight his knuckles went white. "Do not," Wren said beside him. She did not look at him. She stared straight ahead at the coffin being lowered into the red earth. "You hit him, you go to jail, we lose everything. That is exactly what he wants. He killed Hank. We do not know that. We know it. Knowing and proving are 2 different countries, Marcus. And we cannot afford to live in the first one." She was right. She was always right about the strategic things, the things that required thinking 3 moves ahead instead of 1 move straight at the enemy. And that was what burned Marcus worst, not the grief or the anger, but the growing awareness that Wren was carrying this fight while he stood behind her feeling useless, a rancher with a hammer in a world that required scalpels. After the funeral, after the mourners had scattered and the grave diggers had finished their work, Marcus walked alone to the fresh mound of earth and stood there for a long time. He did not pray because he had never been sure about praying, but he made a promise to a dead man who could not hear it. "I will not let them win, Hank, whatever it costs." He did not know yet what it would cost, but the bill was coming. That evening, alone in his hotel room, Nathaniel Hargrove poured whiskey with hands that would not stop shaking. He had not ordered the fire. He was almost certain he had not. He had told his men to handle the witnesses. Those were his exact words. Handle them. And what does handle mean to men who carry guns for a living and consider violence the most efficient form of communication? He looked at Eleanor's photograph. It was getting harder to see her face clearly, not because the image was fading, but because the man looking at it was. "I am doing this for you," he whispered. But even he knew that was a lie. Eleanor would have hated what he had become. She would have looked at him with those clear gray eyes that never let him hide from himself, and she would have said, "Nathaniel, you are lost. Come home." He drank until the photograph blurred, and the voice stopped. In the days after Hank's death, two things happened that cracked the foundation Wren and Marcus were trying to build. First, Marcus pieced together something that Wren had been hoping he would not notice. Hargrove's men had known she was in Durango before she came to Marcus. She had gone to the land office alone. She had confronted Hargrove's lawyer alone. Her pride, her refusal to ask for help, her bone-deep insistence on doing everything herself, had eliminated their element of surprise. If she had come to Marcus first, if they had planned together, if they had been careful, Hargrove might not have had time to activate his men. Hank Donovan might still be alive. Marcus did not say this to Wren. He did not need to. She had already figured it out herself. He saw it in the way she flinched when someone mentioned Hank's name, in the way she stared at her hands sometimes like they belonged to someone else, in the way her voice went flat and mechanical when she discussed strategy, as if the only way to keep functioning was to cut away the part of herself that felt. The guilt was eating her alive, and she would not let anyone see it. The second thing that happened was the alliance began to crumble. Two witnesses who had agreed to support their case sent word that they had reconsidered. A third simply stopped answering the door. Doc Crawford still would not commit. The ground they had gained door to door was eroding under the weight of fear and Hargrove's money. For the first time since she arrived, Marcus saw Wren lost. She sat on his porch in the failing light, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around them, staring at the darkening mountains like they held answers she could not find in documents or courtrooms. "I always have a plan," she said, more to herself than to him. "I have had a plan every day for 8 years. Read this, learn this, go here, do this. And now I do not have one. And a man is dead because I was too proud to ask for help. Wren, do not tell me it is not my fault. I went to the land office alone. I announced myself to Hargrove's people because I thought I could handle it. I thought I did not need anyone. And now Hank Donovan is in the ground." Her voice broke on the old man's name, just for a second. Then she pulled it back together the way she always did, with that fierce, stubborn will that was both her greatest weapon and the wall that kept her from letting anyone close enough to help carry the weight. Marcus sat beside her, not touching, just close. "I have an idea," he said. "You are not going to like it. I have not liked anything for the past week. Go ahead. I will sign over 50 acres of Redstone Ranch to your family, voluntarily. No court, no deed, no fight. I will write up a transfer and file it at the land office tomorrow." Wren looked at him like he had suggested they fly to the moon. "No. It is your land, Wren. My grandfather meant for your family to have it. I am just finishing what he started. If you give it to us, Hargrove wins. He just buys it back through threats, or waits until my father is alone and sends his men again. We need the court to recognize the deed, the original deed, because if the court recognizes it, it sets a precedent. No one can take it again. Not Hargrove, not anyone after him." Marcus stared at her and understood for the first time the full scope of what she was fighting for. Not 50 acres, not even the silver. She was fighting for the principle that a promise made by a white man to an Apache family had to be protected by law, not just by goodwill. Because goodwill dies with the men who hold it. Law, if it is written correctly, outlasts them all. All right, he said. Then we fight in court. With what? She asked. We have lost Hank. 2 other witnesses have backed out. Doc will not testify. Hargrove has Denver lawyers and railroad money. What do we have? We have the deed. We have Clay. We have Sally Hayes, who is meaner than any lawyer I have ever met. We have the truth. The truth, Wren said flatly. The truth does not win trials, Marcus. Evidence wins trials. Then we will find more evidence. She looked at him for a long moment. The kind of look that measures a person not by what they have done, but by what they might do if pushed hard enough. All right, she said. We fight. That evening, as they sat around the kitchen table with a map and dwindling hope, the front door opened and Doc Crawford walked in. He looked 10 years older than he had a week ago. His bag was in his hand and his shoulders were bent, like he was carrying something heavier than leather and instruments. Hank was my friend for 40 years, Doc said. I do not care how many clinics Hargrove funds. I will testify. He sat down at the table. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Sally Hayes, who had arrived an hour earlier with a basket of bread and a rifle she did not explain, said, Well, that makes 6 of us against the richest man in the territory. I have had worse odds. She had not, but the lie was exactly what they needed. Jacob Redfeather rode into Durango on a horse he had acquired under circumstances that would later require some creative explaining to Sheriff Clay Mercer. The horse technically belonged to a rancher near the Wyoming border who owed Jacob $30 for tracking work, and Jacob had technically taken the horse as payment without technically informing the owner. In Apache tradition, this constituted fair settlement of a debt. In territorial law, this constituted theft. Clay, upon hearing the explanation, pinched the bridge of his nose and said, Apache tradition does not hold up in court, Jacob. Neither does a forged warrant, Jacob replied. And yet here we are. Clay could not argue with that. He agreed to overlook the horse on the grounds that they had bigger problems, which was true, and that the horse's owner was unlikely to ride 400 miles south to press charges, which was also true, and that Jacob Redfeather looked like a man who had been running for 8 years and had finally stopped, which was the truest thing of all. Jacob had come because he heard about Hank Donovan's death through the network of Apache and Navajo families who passed news across territories the way water finds its way through rock, slowly, but with the certainty of things that cannot be stopped. He knew his daughter was in Durango. He knew the situation had gone past legal disputes and into the territory where men died. The reunion between father and daughter was not warm. They stood in Marcus's kitchen 10 feet apart, and the air between them was so heavy with 8 years of silence that Marcus could almost feel it pressing against his skin. You are 8 years late, Wren said. I know, Jacob replied, but I am here. They did not embrace. The distance was too wide for that, a distance measured not in feet but in years and choices, and the particular kind of hurt that comes when a child realizes her parent is not the person she believed them to be. Clay offered protective custody, the legal framework that would allow Jacob to stay at the ranch under the sheriff's authority rather than in a cell. Jacob accepted with the quiet dignity of a man who had spent 8 years running and was simply tired of it. That night, around Marcus's kitchen table, Jacob told the truth. Not just about the false warrant and Morrison's manufactured debt, but about the thing he had carried inside himself like a sickness for 8 years, the real reason he ran. I knew about the silver, he said. The words dropped into the silence like stones into deep water. Wren's head came up slowly. Marcus stopped breathing. There is an old Spanish map, Jacob continued, his hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee, his eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. I found it in a cave on the ridge years before you were born, Wren. It showed the location of a mine. I showed it to Thomas Caldwell. He had the land surveyed. The silver was real. Why did you never tell me? Wren asked. and her voice was the kind of quiet that comes before thunder. Because I was afraid. Jacob looked at his daughter, and there was nothing in his expression except the raw, exhausted honesty of a man who has run out of places to hide. I have seen what silver does to men, seen it hollow them out until there is nothing left but greed wearing a human face. I told myself I was protecting you. But the truth is I was protecting myself from temptation, from the man I was afraid I would become if I stayed. Wren stared at him. You left me, she said slowly, because you were afraid of being rich. I left you because I was afraid of what richness would make me. There is a difference. Is there? Because from where I was standing, watching that wagon leave, the result was the same. I was 13 years old and alone. 17, Jacob corrected quietly. 13 the first time I felt alone, Father. 17 when you made it official. The silence that followed was the kind that fills rooms and makes the walls feel closer. Marcus sat at the end of the table and said nothing because this was not his conversation. It belonged to them, to the 8 years of anger and love and disappointment that lay between a father who chose flight and a daughter who chose to fight. Jacob spoke again, and his voice was barely above a whisper. You could have told me. You could have let me choose. You were 17, old enough to be left behind, not old enough to be told why. The question hung in the air. Jacob had no answer for it. There was no answer. He had decided for her the same way Caldwell had decided for him, the same way men have been deciding for the people they love since the beginning of time, telling themselves it was protection when it was really just fear dressed up in noble clothing. 3 days after Jacob's arrival, Hargrove made his move. A message came through his lawyer, the Denver man named Cyrus Blackwood, requesting a private meeting with Wren Redfeather. Wren went alone. She did not tell Marcus. This was her pride again, her flaw, the part of her that had kept her alive for 8 years and was now threatening to destroy everything she had built. Hargrove met her in a private room at the Strater Hotel. He was calmer than she expected, polished. He offered her a chair and a glass of water and spoke in the measured tones of a man who has rehearsed what he is about to say. I am going to be direct, Miss Redfeather, because I think you are the kind of woman who appreciates directness. I'm the kind of woman who appreciates honesty, but go ahead. $2,000. All charges against your father dropped immediately. Your family relocates anywhere you choose with enough money to start fresh. A new life. No more running. The number landed like a physical thing. $2,000 in 1906 was not just money. It was a house. It was land. It was safety for her father and stability for herself, and an end to 8 years of wandering. In exchange, Hargrove continued, you sign away all claims to the 50 acres. You leave Durango, and you do not speak of the deed or the silver to anyone, ever. Wren sat in that hotel room and looked at the man across the table and felt something she had not expected to feel. Temptation. She was exhausted. Hank Donovan was dead because of her pride. The case was fragile. Her father was a fugitive living on borrowed time. More people could die. The deal Hargrove was offering would give her family everything except the one thing she had come back for. Justice. I need 24 hours, she said. Hargrove nodded. Of course. She stood to leave. At the door, she turned back. Mr. Hargrove, did you order the fire that killed Hank Donovan? Something moved behind his eyes. Not guilt exactly, something more complicated. I told my men to handle things, he said. I did not specify how. That is not an answer. No, he agreed quietly. It is not. She walked out into the October air and stood on the boardwalk and breathed and breathed and breathed. Marcus found out about the meeting from Clay, who had heard from a deputy who had seen Wren entering the Strater. He rode to the ranch and found her sitting on the porch staring at nothing. and the look on her face told him something had broken that he did not know how to fix. "You went to him," Marcus said. He was trying to keep his voice level. He was failing. "Behind my back. After everything we have been through, you went to Hargrove alone. I went to hear what he had to say." "And what did he say?" "He offered me $2,000 to go away." The number hung in the air. "And you are considering it," Marcus said. It was not a question. "I am considering the fact that a man is dead, because I was too proud to ask for help, and more people might die if I keep fighting." "Yes, Marcus. I am considering it." The argument that followed was the worst they had ever had. Not the loudest. The worst. Because the worst arguments are the ones where both people are partially right, and neither can see the other's truth through the fog of their own. "You went to him behind my back," Marcus said again, and there was something cracking in his voice, something that sounded less like anger and more like the thing underneath anger, the thing that anger exists to protect. "Everything?" Ren fired back. "You mean the part where I've been fighting this battle mostly alone for 8 years while you fixed fences and waited for me to come back and solve your grandfather's guilt for you?" It was vicious. It was unfair. It was also partially true. And then Marcus Brennan made the same mistake that his grandfather had made. The same mistake Jacob had made. The same mistake that every man in this story had made when faced with the possibility of losing someone they loved. He decided for her. "Then take the deal," he said. His voice was flat. Dead. The voice of a man putting boards over a window before a storm. "Take the money. Take your father. Go somewhere safe." He meant it as love. He meant it as protection. He meant I cannot lose another person. He meant Hank is dead, and you might be next, and I would rather you hate me alive than love me dead. But that is not what Ren heard. Ren heard the same words she had heard from every man who had ever claimed to love her. "I know what is best for you. I will decide. You do not get to choose." "You sound exactly like my father," she said, and her voice was quiet in the way that a blade is quiet when it slides between ribs. "Exactly like your grandfather. You think loving someone means choosing for them." She walked off the porch. She did not look back. She rode to the red feather cabin and did not return. For 2 days, Marcus did not see Ren. He fixed fences. He fed cattle. He did the things a man does when his hands need to move because his mind will not stop. He replayed the argument 100 times, looking for the moment where he went wrong, and each time he found it in the same place. Take the deal, take the money, go. He had told her to leave. The same thing his father had done to him, wordlessly, on an October morning 14 years ago. The same thing Caldwell had done to Jacob by hiding the deed. The same thing Jacob had done to Ren by running. The pattern, the curse. The thing that every man in this family and in hers had done when the stakes got high enough. They decided alone. They chose protection over partnership. And every time, the protection caused more damage than the danger. On the second night, sitting alone in his kitchen with the lamp burning low and the photograph of Caldwell and Jacob in cavalry uniforms on the table in front of him, Marcus made a decision. Not to be right, not to win, just to be different from every man who had come before him. He rode to the red feather cabin at midnight. The sky was clear and cold and full of stars that did not care about the problems of the people beneath them. He knocked on the door and waited. Ren opened it with a rifle in her hands and fury on her face. "I was wrong," Marcus said. "I do not get to choose for you. Tell me what you need, and I will do it. But the choice is yours. It was always supposed to be yours." She did not invite him in. But she did not close the door. The Durango County Courthouse held 60 people. On the morning of the hearing, 120 wedged themselves inside, and Marcus thought that if the floor gave way, at least the whole town would go down together. They arrived separately, Marcus from the ranch and Ren from the red feather cabin, and walked into the courtroom without touching, without speaking, without any of the visible alliance that the crowd expected to see. They had not fully reconciled. The wound from their argument was still open, not bleeding but not healed, and the distance between them was something people noticed and whispered about. What no one knew, except Wren herself, was why she had rejected Hargrove's deal. It was not Marcus's midnight visit. It was not his apology, though the apology mattered more than she would admit for a long time. It was something she had realized on her own, sitting in the red feather cabin the night before, staring at the ceiling while her father slept in the next room. Accepting the deal meant accepting silence about Hank Donovan's death. It meant taking Hargrove's money and walking away knowing that the old man who had promised to stand up for them had died for that promise, and his death would go unmarked and unavenged and unexplained. Hargrove's $2,000 would buy not just her land, but her complicity. And Wren Red Feather, whatever else she was, whatever mistakes she had made, was not a woman who could live with that. The choice was hers, and she chose to fight. Judge Rebecca Harding sat behind the bench, a woman of 45 with steel gray hair pulled back from a face that gave nothing away. She had been appointed from Denver to hear the case after Judge Samuel Porter recused himself on account of being a material witness who had signed the deed in 1898. Harding knew no one in the room. She had no loyalties, no debts, and no patience for sentiment. She ruled on law, not feeling. This made the trial harder and more honest. Cyrus Blackwood, Hargrove's attorney, presented first. He was a silver-haired man in an expensive suit who spoke with the smooth precision of someone who charges by the word and makes everyone count. The deed was never probated, Blackwood argued. Jacob Redfeather abandoned the property in 1898 and made no claim for 8 years. Under Colorado territorial abandonment law, property that is not maintained or claimed reverts to availability. Furthermore, the deed itself was of questionable validity, signed by a man in his declining years whose mental competency could not be verified. The argument was strong, clean, professional, the kind of argument that wins cases, not because it is true, but because it is airtight. Marcus presented next, and he was none of those things. He stumbled over legal terms, he lost his place twice. He spoke in the short, rough sentences of a man more comfortable with a hammer than a courtroom. But Judge Harding watched him with the patience of someone who valued honesty over polish, and when he laid the original deed on the evidence table, she studied it for a long time. Clay took the stand and presented his forgery evidence. The comparison of signatures on the warrant that showed inconsistencies in the handwriting, the affidavit from Judge Henderson's widow in Wyoming, confirming her husband had never signed such a document. Samuel Porter, now a witness rather than a judge, confirmed he had witnessed the deed and remembered the day clearly. Doc Crawford testified to Caldwell's character, and his voice broke when he mentioned Hank Donovan's name. The courtroom went very still. Then Wren took the stand. She did not give a speech. She did not make an emotional appeal. She argued like a lawyer because she had spent 6 years teaching herself to be one, and she used that education now with the precision of a surgeon and the fury of a woman who had been underestimated her entire life. She cited territorial precedent for deeds that had not been formally probated. She explained that abandonment law does not apply when the departure was coerced through fraudulent means, specifically a forged warrant. She demonstrated that an unprobated deed is not an invalid deed, but simply one that has not yet been processed. A distinction that matters in law, even if it sounds like splitting hairs. Judge Harding leaned forward for the first time. Interested? Blackwood countered with his strongest card. He called a witness, a former neighbor, who testified that Reverend Caldwell had shown signs of mental decline in his final years, confusion and forgetfulness, and moments of disorientation. If Caldwell was incompetent, the deed could be challenged as the product of a diminished mind. Wren was ready. She held up Caldwell's letter, the one found with the deed, written in 1905, just months before his death. The letter was lucid, detailed, specific. It referenced the deed, the silver, the conspiracy. It named Edmund Hargrove. It demonstrated a mind that was sharp and clear and fully aware of what it was doing. If Reverend Caldwell was incompetent, Wren said, her voice steady and her eyes on the judge, he could not have written this letter. The defense cannot have it both ways. Harding nodded slowly. She studied the letter. She studied the deed. She looked at the crowd and at the attorneys and at the people who had come to see whether justice still meant anything in a town where money had tried to buy the answer. I will need 48 hours to review the evidence, she said. This court is adjourned. Outside the courthouse, the October air was sharp and clean and tasted like wood smoke and frost. Marcus found Wren sitting alone on the stone steps, her hands clasped between her knees, staring at the mountains. He sat beside her, not touching, close enough. You were brilliant in there, he said. I was terrified in there. Same thing sometimes. She almost smiled. Not quite, but the muscles in her face tried, and that was enough. As they stood to leave, Marcus caught Hargrove's eye across the dispersing crowd. Hargrove was not looking at Marcus. He was looking at Jacob, who stood with Clay near the hitching post. And in that look, Marcus saw something more dangerous than anger. He saw the desperation of a man who was about to lose everything and knew it, and the knowledge that desperate men are capable of things that would horrify them in daylight. In the 48 hours before Judge Harding delivered her ruling, Marcus Brennan learned that waiting for a court decision was worse than waiting for rain during a drought. At least with drought, you could look at the sky and guess. The night before the verdict, Marcus and Wren sat on the porch at Redstone Ranch, the same porch where they had sat 8 years ago when she asked him about marriage, and he answered with a joke and a timeline he never expected her to hold him to, the same steps, the same view, the same sky burning itself out over the western peaks. But different people now, harder and softer in ways that did not contradict each other, so much as prove that a person can be both. If we lose, Wren said, I am not staying in Durango. I will go back east. There is a life waiting for me there. Not the life I want, but a life. Marcus stared out at the darkening valley. If we lose, I am still here. I will sign the land over to your family regardless of what the court says, because it is right. And the promise? The one about marrying me? He was quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet that has weight to it. The kind that comes when a man is choosing his words not for how they sound, but for whether they are true. That promise does not depend on any verdict, he said. It depends on you. She looked at him. In the failing light, her eyes were dark and deep and searching. The same eyes that had assessed him at 17 and found him insufficient, and come back at 25 to check again. That is the first smart thing you have said in 8 years, she told him. He almost smiled. I have been practicing. They sat in a silence that was different from all the other silences between them. Not awkward, not loaded. Just two people being still together, which is its own form of intimacy. Harder to achieve than most. Before dawn, while the sky was still black and the stars still burned, Marcus heard a horse on the path. He was on the porch with coffee already, because he had not slept, and he watched the rider approach with his hand near his hip out of habit. It was Hargrove, alone. No hired men, no lawyer. Just a man on a horse with a bottle in his hand, and the look of someone who has been arguing with himself all night and lost. He dismounted clumsily, which told Marcus the bottle was not full. He stood in the yard and looked up at the porch, and for the first time he did not look powerful or dangerous or calculating. He looked like a man standing in the ruins of something that was already broken before he started. Do you know what happens if I lose tomorrow, Brennan? His voice was rough, frayed at the edges. 200 men work for me. Their families eat because I pay them. If I go bankrupt, they lose everything. You think you are saving one family. You are destroying 200. Marcus came down the porch steps slowly. Not aggressive, just meeting the man on level ground. I am sorry about your workers, he said. Truly. Then let this go. Take the money. Everybody wins. Everybody except the family your father stole from. Everybody except Hank Donovan. Hargrove's face contorted. I did not. I told my men to handle the situation. I did not say I never meant for anyone to, but someone did. And you put the machine in motion. That is the thing about machines, Mr. Hargrove. Once they start moving, they do not take orders very well. Hargrove stared at him. Then the fight went out of him all at once, like a horse that has run itself to exhaustion. He sagged. His hand with the bottle dropped to his side. My father ruined me, he said, and his voice was barely audible. Left me debts dressed up as an empire. I have been trying to save something that was already dead, and now I have... He stopped, swallowed. You look at me and you see a villain. But I had a wife once. She died trying to give me a son. I had a future once. My father gambled it away. I have got nothing left, Brennan. Nothing except a hole in the ground that might have silver in it, and 200 families counting on me to find it. Marcus looked at him for a long time, and felt something he did not expect. Not forgiveness, not absolution, but pity. The recognition that Nathaniel Hargrove was also, in his own terrible way, a man destroyed by his father's choices. You cannot build their future on stolen ground, Marcus said quietly. My grandfather gave his word, and where I come from, your word is the only thing you own that no one can take from you. Hargrove stood there in the pre-dawn darkness. Then he turned and walked to his horse and mounted with the heavy movements of a man carrying more than his body can hold. He rode away without another word, and Marcus watched him go and was not sure whether he had just witnessed a performance or a confession. He would never know for certain, neither would the reader. The courthouse was full again, standing room only. The crowd pressed against the walls and spilled out onto the boardwalk, and Clay had deputized 2 men just to keep the doorway clear. Judge Rebecca Harding took her seat behind the bench and looked out at the assembled faces with the expression of someone who has weighed everything on scales that do not account for sentiment. She picked up a document. She read. In the matter of land ownership regarding 50 acres adjacent to Redstone Ranch, this court finds as follows. The room went silent. The kind of silence that has texture, that you can feel against your skin. First, the deed dated June 12, 1898, granting 50 acres to Jacob Red Feather and his heirs in perpetuity, is found to be legitimate and valid. It is hereby entered into probate and recognized by this court. Wren's hand found Marcus's under the table. He was not sure who reached first. Second, the warrant for the arrest of Jacob Red Feather, filed in 1898, shows sufficient evidence of forgery to be dismissed. Mr. Red Feather, you are cleared of all charges related to that warrant. Jacob, sitting behind them, made a sound that was almost a word but not quite. 8 years of running, ending in a single sentence. Third, Mr. Red Feather is ordered to repay the sum of $85 to the estate of Morrison, representing the only legitimate debt established by the evidence. A murmur from the crowd. Not the clean sweep they had hoped for. The debt was real, even if it had been manufactured through exploitation. Law does not always give you everything you want. Sometimes it just gives you enough. Fourth, the evidence presented in these proceedings suggests a pattern of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy warranting further investigation. This court refers the matter to the Territorial Attorney General's office in Denver for review and potential prosecution of Nathaniel Hargrove and Patrick Stiles. Harding looked up from her document. This court is adjourned. The eruption was immediate. People on their feet shouting, some cheering, some protesting. Clay banged for order. Sally Hayes was crying openly. Doc Crawford was grinning for the first time in a week. Jacob sat perfectly still with his eyes closed and his hands flat on the table, as though he needed to feel something solid beneath him to believe the ground was not going to open up and swallow this moment before he could hold it. Through it all, Wren held Marcus's hand. She had not let go. It was not a perfect victory, but it was a real one, the kind that holds. Later, after the crowd had thinned and the lawyers had packed their cases and Hargrove had been escorted from the courthouse by Clay's deputies, Wren and Marcus stood on the courthouse steps in the October sun. "It is over," Wren said. She sounded like she was trying the words on to see if they fit. "The court part is over," Marcus agreed. "And the other part?" He looked at her. The afternoon light caught the turquoise at her throat and the red cloth in her braid and the faint tracks of tears she had not wiped away. "The other part is just beginning, if you want it to be." "You still have not properly asked me, Marcus Brennan." "Asked you what?" "You know what." He did. And for once in his life, he did not joke, did not deflect, did not qualify or hedge, or leave himself an exit. 1 week later, he rode to the red feather cabin where Wren and Jacob were clearing brush and rebuilding the structure that had stood empty for 8 years. He dismounted, stood in front of her with red dirt on his boots and sawdust in his hair and his hat in his hands. "8 years ago," he said, "I told you that if you still wanted to marry a man who could not do anything except fix fences wrong, I would be right here. I was wrong about one thing." "Only one?" "I do not want to marry you because I owe you a promise. I want to marry you because I do not want to fix fences alone anymore." Wren looked at him, then at her father, standing in the cabin doorway with something bright and fierce in his old eyes. "I do not need you to fix fences, Marcus. I fix them better than you do. But I would not mind someone to bring me coffee when I am done." He kissed her then for the first time, standing in the red dirt in front of the cabin, with Jacob watching and the mountains watching and somewhere on the ridge a wild mustang watching too. The kiss tasted like dust and hope, and the particular sweetness of a thing that has been waited for so long that the waiting has become part of its flavor. The wedding was held in spring, 1907, on the 50 acres that had nearly cost them everything. It was small, and it was perfect. Sally Hayes cooked for 80 people and charged nobody. Clay stood beside Marcus in his best shirt, which was also his only shirt that did not have a bullet hole in it. Jacob walked Wren down the dirt road that ran between the two properties, past the fence line where they had first met, and when he placed her hand in Marcus's, his own hand was steady for the first time in 8 years. Judge Harding sent a card from Denver. 2 words. "Well done." Nathaniel Hargrove was tried by the Territorial District Court in Denver 6 months later. He was convicted of fraud and conspiracy and sentenced to 4 years at the Colorado State Penitentiary in Cannon City. Patrick Stiles received 2 years at the same facility. Hargrove's railroad workers were absorbed by a competing company. Marcus wrote the letters that made it happen because cruelty is not the same as justice, and the workers had never been the enemy. The silver mine was never developed. Marcus and Wren talked about it once, sitting on the porch of the rebuilt cabin on a summer evening when the fireflies were out, and the world felt gentle enough to forgive. "We could be rich," Marcus said. "We could be ourselves," Wren replied. "I have seen what silver does to people. My father saw it too. That is why he ran. And now? Now I think there are things worth more than what you can pull from the ground." They turned the 50 acres into a school. Apache children and town children sitting in the same room learning from a woman who could teach in 2 languages and had the patience to wait for understanding the way she once waited for a wild horse to come to her hand. The school was the first of its kind in the territory. It would not be the last. Before the wedding that morning, Marcus and Wren walked together to the cemetery at the edge of town. They stood in front of a simple wooden marker that read Hank Donovan, 1835 to 1906, Cowboy. Wren placed a bundle of wildflowers on the grave, purple asters and yellow rabbit brush, the kind that grows wild along the ridgeline and blooms every October no matter what. "He should have been here today," she said. Marcus said nothing. There was nothing to say. They stood in silence for a full minute, 2 people honoring a man who had died for keeping his word, and the silence was the truest thing either of them had offered all day. That evening, After the guests had gone home and the lanterns had burned down to embers and the ranch was quiet except for the wind in the grass and the distant call of coyotes, Marcus and Wren sat on the porch of the red feather cabin. Their cabin now. Their porch. Wren reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a book. An English reader, dog-eared and water-stained, the spine cracked and the pages soft with age. She had carried it for 9 years, from Colorado to Arizona to Santa Fe to Boston and back again. "I have been meaning to return this," she said. Marcus took it, opened it to the back cover, found his own handwriting, blocky and young, written by a 19-year-old boy who had probably spent 10 minutes working up the nerve. "Return whenever. I am not going anywhere." He looked at her. The lamplight caught the silver bracelet on her wrist, and the turquoise at her throat, and the faint smile on her lips that was not faint at all, but full and warm and meant for him alone. "Keep it," he said. "I am still not going anywhere." Yoshi. They sat together in the quiet, watching the sun slip behind the San Juan peaks, the book resting between them like a bridge connecting the children they had been and the people they had become. The fence line was still there, the boundary between his land and hers, but someone had left the gate open, and neither of them saw any reason to close it. Somewhere on the ridge, in the last gold light, a Mustang stood watching them from a distance, wild, unbothered, free. It could have run. It stayed. Some things do not need fences to keep them. Some things just need a reason to stay. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.